She thought I was the maid, I was the homeowner. 2 days later, she slapped a fake fine on my garbage can and called the cops because my Honda Civic looked too businesslike. Her name's Karen, HOA president, self-appointed sheriff of suburban nonsense. What she didn't know, I'm a real estate lawyer with a binder full of receipts and a grandfather who built this whole neighborhood. So I let her keep digging, then buried her with the fine print. She didn't ask my name. She asked if I was the new housekeeper while standing on the porch of my own house, gripping a faux leather clipboard like it came straight from the Supreme Court. I had just opened the front door, still in sweatpants and a hoodie with my hair in a messy bun, clutching an iced coffee and juggling keys. This home hasn't had activity in a while, she said, squinting at me like I was a smudge on her windshield. Are you renting? I blinked. No, I live here. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, sweetie, I'm sure your landlord appreciates how tidy you're keeping it. That's how I met Karen. The house at 1372 Oak Bridge Drive wasn't rented. It was inherited from my grandfather, George Carter, who designed and helped build Brookside Hollow in 1982. After law school, I navigated probate, processed the title, and moved in less than a month ago. I hadn't even unpacked half my boxes when the clipboard crusader showed up. Karen, president of the HOA, unofficial mayor, full-time neighborhood watchdog, wore a name tag with Brookside Hollow Leadership and Legacy printed in cursive. That should have been my first red flag. She didn't welcome me to the neighborhood. She didn't ask what kind of cookies I liked. She asked how many hours I stayed home during the day and whether any permanent adults were scheduled to move in soon. She handed me a form titled Community Occupancy Declaration and said, just standard procedure for new arrivals. You'll want to sign and return it within 24 hours to avoid misunderstandings. The kicker? My name was already signed, typed in red ink at the bottom next to hers. I looked up, stunned, but Karen was already halfway down the driveway. She turned, raised her phone, and took a photo of my car parked in the driveway. No explanation, just a slow nod and a smirk like she'd caught me committing some kind of suburban felony. I hadn't even finished installing curtains. Now I was apparently under surveillance. Later that evening, I logged into the community HOA portal to see if there were actual rules about occupancy declarations. What I found was worse. On the public message board, Karen had already posted, heads up, unconfirmed individual spotted at 1372, no ownership records yet, security alert in effect, report suspicious behavior. The comments were illuminating. One neighbor wrote, saw her wearing joggers and blasting music, not exactly homeowner behavior. Another asked if I might be running an Airbnb. The HOA post had 19 likes and a comment that said, could be squatting, let's stay vigilant. It was my third night sleeping there. I wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Karen just had an aggressive brand of neighborly concern. But when I stepped out the next morning to get the mail, I noticed something tucked behind the streetlight. A small, barely visible motion Slinger camera aimed directly at my front door. And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about welcome. This wasn't about community. This was about control. Karen hadn't come to say hello. She came to declare war. With a clipboard, a smile, and absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. The camera stayed on me for 3 days. I checked the angle myself with my phone flashlight at night. It was perfectly framed on my porch and driveway. I didn't touch it. I just noted it, because a big part of being a lawyer, even a new one, is knowing when to collect evidence quietly. That was my first official HOA lesson. In Brookside Hollow, privacy wasn't a right. It was a privilege earned through age, conformity, and possibly a background check signed in blood. You know, Karen didn't just dislike me. She was building a case. And like any overzealous prosecutor, she wanted a paper trail before the public trial. On Thursday, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my door. The letter inside had a letterhead that said Brookside Hollow Residence Advisory. It was signed K. Whitmore, President, and labeled First Notice of Noncompliance. The offense, improper waste receptacle presentation. I had rolled my garbage bins out the night before collection day exactly as outlined in the HOA rules, but according to the letter, bins were visible from the street between 4 o'clock and 6:15 p.m. on a non-designated evening. A $75.00 fine was listed, payable online or by certified check. There was even a tiny black and white photo included. zoomed in, grainy, time-stamped 5:12 p.m. My green garbage bin had officially committed its first offense. I didn't pay it. I printed the HOA bylaws, highlighted the relevant section, and drafted a letter back. But before I could send it, Karen escalated. Saturday morning, I stepped outside to find a folded HOA flyer stuck in the mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting, topic, addressing unauthorized occupancy concerns. The location? Karen's own living room. Underneath was a single sentence. Community trust begins with transparency. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. She was hosting a meeting in her house about me without saying my name, but everyone knew. The photo of my car had quietly made it into the next HOA email under the subject line, neighborhood vehicles of concern. It was starting to affect my life in small but vicious ways. I waved at a neighbor while walking my dog. She turned her back and faked a phone call. A landscaper I'd hired canceled on me last minute. My DoorDash orders started being misdelivered. I wasn't paranoid. One of them ended up across the street with Mrs. Templeton, who claimed it was just sitting out. That same week, someone slid a note under my door. You might be better off somewhere with looser stand. It wasn't signed, but the stationery matched Karen's welcome packet. The tone was practically trademarked. Polite enough for plausible deniability, condescending enough to make your teeth grind. Still, I tried to keep it together until a fake inspection. One afternoon, I heard a knock and opened the door to find Karen in a reflective vest, holding a clipboard and a tool I can only describe as a lawn ruler. We're conducting random aesthetic checks, she announced. I asked under what authority. Section 4C, lawn uniformity and visual harmony, she replied, tapping her sheet. I let her measure my lawn, my mailbox height, and no joke, the alignment of my porch chairs. She wrote everything down, smiled, and as she turned to leave, she paused on the top step and said, "People lack predictability, Emily. It's what makes a neighborhood feel safe." Then she walked off, humming something suspiciously close to the Law and Order theme. I watched her go, heart pounding not from fear, but from clarity. She wasn't just collecting data. She was laying a legal trap. And unfortunately for Karen, I was exactly the wrong person to try that with, because unlike her, I knew how to write the fine print, and I just decided to start writing my own. I didn't retaliate immediately. That's not how you handle a Karen. You wait, you document, and you stay calm while they dig their own hole, one ridiculous accusation at a time. By now, I had a folder on my laptop titled Operation Karen, filled with timestamps, letters, and screenshots. I even had a spreadsheet. But it was her next move that told me she was no longer just trying to intimidate me. She was trying to get me out. That Monday, a notice was shoved into my doorframe with bright red ink and block letters that read, "Second offense, vehicle misclassification." Apparently, my silver Honda Civic was now considered a commercial transport vehicle. Her justification? Presence of a Lyft sticker. I hadn't driven for Lyft since undergrad. The sticker was faded, barely visible, but according to Karen, it was grounds for a $250.00 violation and an official review of residential eligibility. That was HOA speak for we're looking for a loophole to evict you. The next day, I returned home to find my mailbox open and my mail gone. A neighbor later said she saw someone in a pink sweater with a clipboard hovering near it earlier that afternoon. When I confronted Karen politely, she didn't deny anything. Instead, she smiled and said, tampering with community equipment is a federal offense. Community equipment? She meant my mailbox. That's when I started to suspect that Karen didn't just want me gone. She needed me gone. Something about me, my age, my presence, the fact that I didn't grovel when she knocked was a threat to her little kingdom. And nothing fuels a petty tyrant like perceived insubordination. The rumors began to spread. A neighbor named Doug, retired, always washing his driveway, stopped talking to me entirely. Mrs. Templeton told a passerby that she heard I was the social media influencer who bought the house as part of a sugar baby arrangement. One morning, I caught two teenage girls taking photos of my house from across the street. When I asked what they were doing, one of them laughed and said, "We're trying to see if the squatter lady really lives here." I had become a character in some deranged suburban true crime podcast. The case of the mysterious girl in the grandpa mansion. Still, I said nothing, not yet. Karen continued her random inspections. She brought a moisture meter to test my sprinkler settings. She emailed the neighborhood about a suspicious quantity of Amazon deliveries coming to my door. She called animal control when she heard my dog bark more than twice in 10 minutes. And through it all, I kept every letter, every picture, every absurd claim. Because I was no longer playing defense, I was gathering ammunition. And Karen, in her need to dominate every inch of the neighborhood, was handing me all the weapons I needed. Then she crossed the final island. On a Thursday afternoon, while I was still at work, Karen called the police. She told them a stranger had been seen forcibly entering 1372 Oak Bridge Drive. The responding officer found nothing out of place, but Karen insisted they do a welfare check. When I returned home that evening, I found my side gate unlatched, my back door ajar, and a sticky note on the counter. Police performed wellness check at request of HOA president. No issues observed. That was the moment I stopped being angry. I started being methodical. Because if Karen wanted to turn my home into a battleground, she'd just given me legal permission to declare war. The welfare check changed everything. It wasn't just an invasion of privacy, it was a shot across the bow. Karen had officially crossed the line from nuisance to liability. And ironically, she'd done it using the very tools I'd been trained to dismantle: false claims, misuse of authority, and fabricated concern. I stared at the sticky note left by Officer Daniels for a full minute, the absurdity of it sinking in. My home, my legally inherited property, had been entered by police because Karen told them I was a danger to myself. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so calculated. That was her game now. Frame me not as a fraud, but as unstable. Easier to remove, easier to control. I didn't call the police, I called my father. Judge Raymond Carter, retired from the state circuit bench, but still sharper than a gavel strike. I told him everything, from the garbage violations to the faux inspections to the bogus welfare check. He didn't say much at first, just listened, the way he always did when he was preparing to dismantle someone on the record. Then he said 6 words that hit harder than any insult Karen could have hurled. "You know what to do, Em." And I did. I spent that weekend not unpacking, not gardening, not even sleeping much. I started digging deep. Because of my grandfather's role in establishing Brookside Hollow, our family still had access to the original HOA charter and amendments, documents Karen clearly hadn't read carefully or assumed no one else had. I pored over the bylaws, found 3 inconsistencies in how violations were being issued, and discovered that the community occupancy declaration she tried to make me sign was never ratified by a board vote. It was a draft, a fake, not legally enforceable. I also found something better. The HOA had a financial ledger accessible to any resident upon formal request. And Karen, she'd been sloppy. Over the next week, I submitted an official financial request under Section 7B of the HOA charter. Karen tried to stall, of course, claimed the files were under audit. I responded with a written statement citing breach of fiduciary duty and gave her 72 hours to comply. She folded. What I received was a treasure trove of petty tyranny. Karen had spent over $2,900, 0 cents of HOA funds on legal consultations, most of which coincided with the exact dates of her complaints against me. There were also charges for security system upgrades that matched the timeline of the porch camera. And then the kicker, an invoice for community compliance printing paid to a print shop owned by her sister-in-law. I highlighted it all, color-coded, annotated, prepped for court if needed. But I wasn't done. I needed witnesses and I needed stories. So I went back to the one neighbor who hadn't turned her back, Mrs. Joyce Levine, age 76, cat lover, certified firecracker. She'd lived on Oak Bridge since before the sidewalks were poured. When I knocked on her door and introduced myself as George Carter's granddaughter, her face softened like butter on a porch swing. "Well, sugar, why didn't you say so earlier?" she asked. And then she invited me in for lemonade and a folder labeled K-Files. No joke. Inside were years of notes, photos, even printed email chains showing Karen harassing everyone from teenage skateboarders to a woman who dared to plant petunias that clashed with the HOA-approved pallet. Joyce wasn't alone. She pointed me to others, residents who'd stayed quiet, who didn't want drama, who paid their fines to avoid the stress. A single mother fined for her toddler's inflatable pool. A military vet threatened over his flag's non-regulation dimensions. A widower scolded for leaving a porch light on past 10 p.m. One by one, they started to talk, not just to me, but to each other. Karen had ruled this neighborhood like it was her fiefdom. But now the villagers were comparing notes and realizing the dragon wasn't that scary when you saw where she bought her smoke machine. By Friday, I had compiled a binder thicker than my bar prep books, violations, testimonies, financial irregularities. I didn't want revenge. I wanted record, accountability, due process. But Karen, she wanted one last act, one final attempt to put me back in my place. And when I got the flyer in my mailbox that weekend, I knew she was going all in. Special HOA session, subject legitimacy of property ownership at 1372 Oak Bridge Drive. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't legal, but it was happening, and I knew exactly what to wear, what to bring, and how to end this, because if Karen wanted a trial, I was going to give her the full courtroom experience, Exhibit A through Z. The flyer was printed on thick cardstock, as of course it was, and sealed with a gold-embossed HOA sticker, as if it were an invitation to a suburban royal inquisition. Special HOA session, it read in bold Times New Roman, to address inconsistencies regarding residential legitimacy and community standards compliance at 1372 Oak Bridge Drive. No names again. But by now, Karen's dog whistle was more like a foghorn. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday, 4 p.m. in the Brookside Hollow Community Room, ironically a space donated decades ago by my grandfather. It felt poetic. She had chosen to accuse me on my family's ground. She just didn't realize how badly that would backfire. I spent the next 2 days preparing like it was a courtroom appearance. I wore a tailored Navy suit, not flashy, but enough to say, "You tried to frame me as a squatter. I'm the damn deed holder." I arrived early and sat in the back row, calm and quiet. My binder of evidence was in my lap, tabs peeking out like sharpened blades. One by one, neighbors trickled in, more than usual. Sharon was already seated at the head of the long conference table, a tall iced tea next to her, clipboard resting like a gavel in front of her. She wore pearls and a smug expression that said, "Today's the day I finally evict this problem." She opened the meeting with a speech dripping in passive-aggressive condescension. We're here today not to single anyone out, but to preserve the integrity of our beloved neighborhood. Recent concerns have arisen regarding the lawful occupation and behavioral alignment of certain new residents. She gestured vaguely toward my direction, then clicked a remote. A projector displayed photos of my car, a screenshot of my Amazon order history, don't ask how she got that, and a blurry picture of me carrying a folding chair. "This," she said dramatically, "is what chaos looks like in a community built on order." A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at her, stunned. One muttered, "Is she serious?" Then came her piece de resistance. "The documents of ownership for 1372 Oak Bridge have not been independently verified by the HOA board and may contain elements that suggest irregular inheritance or misuse of familial legal processes." Translation: she was accusing me publicly of faking my grandfather's will. That was my cue. Before she could launch into her next slide, I stood up, calm, direct. I walked to the front, opened my binder, and placed the original deed of Brookside Hollow with George Carter's signature and seal on the table. Gasps. I followed with the notarized will, probate court ruling, and my current title, all verified and stamped. Then I pulled up my own presentation. What followed wasn't a defense. It was a cross-examination of Karen. I displayed a timeline of every fabricated violation against me, alongside actual HOA bylaws proving their illegitimacy. I zoomed in on receipts showing she'd used community funds without approval to pay a law firm $2,937.52 for compliance consultations, all during the date she was targeting me. I showed surveillance screenshots of her measuring my lawn while ignoring her own overgrown fence. Then came the photos of her husband's commercial van parked overnight, directly violating Section 5A. I ended with a final clip, a doorbell cam video of her removing a flyer from my mailbox and replacing it with her own. Mail tampering. Federal offense. The room was silent. No one moved. Then Mrs. Levine stood up. "That girl," she said, pointing at me, "has done more in 3 weeks than our HOA president has done in 3 years. A ripple of applause followed. Then another neighbor stood up, and another. People began sharing their stories, how Karen fined them for flags, toys, a wind chime. One man pulled out a photo of Karen digging up his wife's tulip bulbs because they were too bright. The air shifted. Karen's empire, built on silence and fear, was collapsing under the weight of collective memory. But it wasn't over yet. Karen, desperate, leaned into the mic and hissed, "This is all lies, fabricated. She's manipulating you." I turned to face her, slow and steady. "Karen," I said, holding up one last document, "you may want to speak with your bank, because according to this, your property is under review for lien violations from 3 months ago." Her face dropped, and somewhere in the back someone whispered, "Oof." She didn't see that coming. Karen didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. That might not sound like much, but for someone whose mouth ran faster than the HOA group chat, it was a record-breaking pause. Her lips moved once, twice, but no sound came out, just a twitch. Her hand slowly reached for the microphone as if it might offer a lifeline, but the damage was done. The room had already shifted. No one was looking at me anymore. They were all looking at her. And for the first time since I moved to Brookside Hollow, I saw what Karen looked like when she wasn't in control. She looked human, small, slightly terrified, but only for a second. Then the entitlement kicked back in. "This is an ambush," she snapped, voice sharp, brittle. "I won't be slandered in my own community. You're all being manipulated by a child who doesn't even belong here." She pointed at me again, finger trembling now. She probably used her judge daddy to cook up these documents. "This isn't a court, this is a community." Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because behind me, Miss Levine stood again and said, "No, Karen, this was your community. You turned it into a courtroom." Someone else added, "And you just lost the case." Then came the moment I hadn't planned, but maybe should have expected. Mr. Kim, a retired CPA who'd spent the last year being fined for a perfectly legal rain barrel, stood up with a manila envelope. "I've done my own audit of our HOA spending," he said, "and it lines up with everything she just showed." He passed out copies. The murmurs turned into outrage. Karen had paid her sister-in-law's business nearly $9,000, 0 cents in the past 2 years for event coordination and printing services, all without board approval. The signatures authorizing the expenses, hers, only hers. Someone shouted, "We want a vote," and just like that, the meeting transformed from a tribunal into a revolution. Mrs. Templeton, the one who once took my DoorDash order, raised her hand, motioned to vote no confidence in Karen Whitmore as HOA president. It was seconded before Karen could open her mouth. Hands shot up, one after another, 35, then 40, then 44. Out of 50 homes represented, 46 voted her out. The two who didn't raise their hands looked like they just hadn't heard the question. Karen stood, stunned. "You can't do this. I have tenure," she screeched, grabbing her clipboard like it was a holy relic. "This isn't legal." I couldn't help myself. "Karen," I said, "you should really stop throwing that word around. It's not doing you any favors." She spun toward me, eyes wild, mouth working like she wanted to say something clever, but all that came out was, "You'll regret this, all of you." Then she grabbed her bag, her tea, and stormed out of the room like she expected someone to chase her. No one did. After she left, the room sat in stunned silence, then laughter, first a chuckle, then a wave of it, bubbling up through rows of folding chairs and name tags. Relief, release. Mr. Kim clapped me on the back and said, "We should have voted you president on the spot." I smiled but shook my head. "I didn't come here for power. I came for peace." Joyce leaned in and whispered, "Well, honey, around here, those two usually need to come in the same package." She wasn't wrong, because as much as I wanted to walk away, I knew that if we didn't clean up the mess Karen left behind, someone just like her would step in. And I had no intention of letting that happen. What none of us knew, though, not yet, was that Karen wasn't done, not even close. Because when tyrants fall, they don't go quietly. They regroup. And in her case, she had a head start. A lawyer cousin in Tampa, and a grudge so big it practically had its own zip code. Karen may have lost her crown, but she didn't lose her appetite for chaos. Less than 48 hours after the vote, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name typed in bold capital letters and sealed with clear packing tape like it was hiding radioactive truth. Inside, a cease and desist letter. allegedly from the law office of Whitmore and Associates, demanding that I immediately retract defamatory statements made during the HOA meeting and cease any further distribution of falsified financial documents. It was so amateurishly written that even my dog would raise an eyebrow, if she could read. There was no bar number, no official header, and the address traced back to a UPS store in Tampa. Karen's lawyer cousin, no doubt, possibly imaginary. Either way, it was adorable. I didn't respond. I forwarded the letter to my actual lawyer and spent the rest of the afternoon updating my Karen files with a new tab labeled Desperation. But then things got weirder. Neighbors began receiving bizarre robocalls from a number listed as Community Alert Line. The voice was clearly an AI-generated Karen impression, like someone had fed a tennis ball to a fax machine. Beware of illegitimate changes in leadership and warned your property values may be at risk. Vote wisely, stay vigilant. Mr. Kim texted me and said, "Is it just me or is Karen trying to stage a HOA coup with Siri?" Meanwhile, real progress was being made. A temporary board was appointed, and Mrs. Levine, bless her lemon bars and war stories, took point on rewriting the bylaws with actual resident oversight. We hosted our first neighborhood meeting post-Karen, and for the first time, it felt like a community, not a courtroom. People laughed, kids ran around, no one took pictures of my recycling bins. I brought cookies, actual cookies, not metaphors for surveillance. But just as the dust was settling, the bombshell hit. Karen and her husband had quietly stopped paying their mortgage, and the bank was foreclosing. I found out from a neighbor who worked in real estate and nearly dropped my coffee when he said it. Looks like the Whitmores took out a second loan to cover personal legal expenses. Might have overextended. There was poetic justice wrapped in bad financial planning. Her house, her castle, her throne was now officially listed for auction. The HOA attorney confirmed it was legal to seize the property as restitution for the misused community funds. All $9,000, 0 cents of them. Still, I kept my celebration quiet. Karma was loud enough on her own. And yet Karen wasn't done gifting us with her unintentional comedy. The day the foreclosure sign went up, she showed up one last time in a black pantsuit, oversized sunglasses, and swear to God, a red scarf blowing in the wind like she was starring in a telenovela. She marched to the community center, slapped a handwritten petition onto the glass door, and left without saying a word. Had 12 signatures, 5 of which were clearly fake. One of them was from Elvis P. Another, Gandalf, HOA certified. I took a picture naturally. As the sun set over Brookside Hollow, something felt different. People started waving again. Kids rode bikes past my house without parents dragging them away. A neighbor who once accused me of unlicensed gardening brought me a pie. The air felt lighter, like we'd collectively exhaled. Karen's reign had been oppressive, yes, but it had also created something she never intended: unity. The fear she ruled with became the glue that held us together in her absence. But there was still one last thing to be done, and I had every intention of seeing it through. Because if Karen thought the foreclosure was the end, she clearly hadn't read the fine print. Karen's house went up for public auction 3 weeks later. It was a warm Saturday morning, the kind where Brookside Hollow would normally be hosting a pancake breakfast or a neighborhood yard sale. Instead, a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk across from 1389 Oak Bridge Drive, sipping coffee with the quiet anticipation of people watching a bad sequel they couldn't believe was still being made. The auctioneer arrived right on time, clipboard in hand. No sign of Karen, no dramatic farewell speech, no final scream into the HOA void, just silence. Her husband had reportedly moved to Arizona with someone named Tiffany, yes, with an I, and Karen, rumor had it she was couch surfing in Tampa, still trying to sue half the neighborhood using free legal templates from the internet. The winning bidder was none other than Mr. Kim's niece, a real estate investor who promised to restore the property and rent it to quiet tenants who believe wind chimes are not acts of war. The moment the sale closed, we passed a resolution to allocate the restitution funds toward a new community garden and a shaded playground area for the kids. Ironically, both projects had been blocked by Karen for years. We voted unanimously to name the new playground the Freedom Lot. Mrs. Levine wanted to go with Karen's final contribution, but we thought that might be a little too spicy. And yes, they asked me to be HOA president. Again, I politely declined, citing something about emotional bandwidth and needing to go at least 1 month without writing a cease and desist letter. Instead, I helped form a rotating resident committee focused on transparency, conflict resolution, and restoring the kind of neighborly trust Karen had systematically eroded. We launched a Welcome Buddy program for new homeowners with laminated cards explaining things like trash pickup, mailbox placement, and most importantly, how to spot a power-hungry clipboard warrior before it's too late. The best part, though, the neighborhood didn't just recover, it bloomed. Front porches sprouted planters again. Kids left chalk drawings on sidewalks without threats of graffiti violations. Mr. Kim even started a weekend workshop on rainwater harvesting. People were smiling, waving, showing up for things. It was almost unnerving. And me, I finally opened my own law practice, focused on HOA abuse, small property disputes, and community rights. Turns out, once word got out about the young woman who legally dethroned a rogue HOA Karen, I had clients lined up from 3 counties. I took them all, every single one, because for every Karen who slinks away into irrelevance, another is waiting, armed with bylaws, blinded by power, and dangerously underestimated. But now people know better. They know to fight back, to band together, to read every line and question every clipboard. Last week, as I watered the rose bushes by my front porch, the same ones Karen once threatened to dig up, I spotted 2 kids playing on the new playground down the street. Their laughter echoed through the air like it belonged there, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own neighborhood. Mrs. Levine passed by, waving from her scooter, and called out, "Looks like justice grows roses too, huh?" I smiled. She wasn't wrong, because in the end, it wasn't just about winning. It was about showing everyone that bullies lose power the second you stop giving it to them. And Karen, well, she became a local legend, a cautionary tale, a meme, a whisper on the wind whenever someone said, what could possibly go wrong with a simple HOA? In neighborhoods and in life, power unchecked becomes poison. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. But the moment a community stops fearing the clipboard and starts reading the fine print, tyrants fall. What happened in Brookside Hollow wasn't just a win for me, it was a reminder that silence fuels bullies, and the antidote is unity backed by truth. You don't need a title to lead. You need conviction, clarity, and sometimes a really organized binder. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, like someone was determined to write you out of your own story, remember this: bullies thrive on isolation. But when we stand together, armed with facts and integrity, we write the ending ourselves. Have you ever taken down a mini tyrant with logic? Drop your story in the comments, smash that like, and don't forget, read your HOA bylaws. You never know when a Karen's